wanted to say thank you all very much for coming, and to just recognize a few of our sponsors and supporters. First of all, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the USC School of Cinematic Arts Institute for Multimedia Literacy, our host organization, and the Visions and Voices Arts and Humanities Initiative. Thank you very much for supporting us with this. So I actually kind of inherited this panel last fall with two names. I was told that the panel was to be on the state of the art and that Henry Jenkins was to be the respondent. And so that left me with this enviable but really kind of incredibly challenging task of trying to think about how to fill in between a panel topic that could mean just about anything and a respondent who could respond to just about anything. It's, it evolved in many different directions. It's interesting to me that we ended up with a panel that I think has skewed heavily toward some of the really most, to my mind, interesting political activities and educational activities that are going on in online DIY media. And I think we're gonna have a really interesting range of perspectives represented by our panelists today. So I don't have too much more to say. I'm going to do little short introductions for each person that I'm going to just read from the program. I'm sorry, just so I don't leave things out. And we're also just going to go in order down the table, beginning with Alex Juhasz. And Alex Juhasz makes, writes, and teaches about activist video. She has made over 15 documentaries on feminist and lesbian issues, including the features Video Remains from 2005, Dear Gabe from 2002, Women of Vision 1998, and The Watermelon Woman from 1996, which is a key text for the book that I'm currently finishing. And her work has been screened at festivals worldwide, including Sundance and Toronto, and her 2007 video, Scale, Ending the Bush Agenda in the Media Age, currently has distribution as an activist resource. Alex teaches at media studies at Pitzer College, and she recently taught a course on and in YouTube, and I confess that it was in the course of planning the panel that I woke up one morning and saw you on CNN with one of your students talking about this course, which was not an insignificant factor in saying, oh, I should invite Alex to be on this panel. So with that, I give you Alex Juhasz.
Okay, so I guess we'll go for it. I taught this wacky class. It did go viral. I did end up on CNN. We also, where's the guy who had taught the other class? I forget your name. I don't know where he is. He's not in here right now. We also had a popularity contest, but the popularity contest was whether we get 1 million hits in a week, and we did. So you might, if anyone's interested in that, that's a story about bad video moving quickly on YouTube. I've been thinking about different ways to try and summarize this really sort of weird experiment that I did. It's been very hard in public presentation, so I'm doing something experimental today. I'm just going to show you 20 minutes of YouTube. I was asked to talk about education, so I created a tour of the class's materials that I thought highlighted some of the things we learned about education. If you're interested in the history of the class is called Learning from YouTube. You can sort of find out about it on the site. So here's the...
Hi, I'm Professor Alex Juhasz, and welcome to the first of 9 video tours that I will be leading to help navigate what we produced for my course, Learning from YouTube, in the fall of 2007. This tour will be on the theme of education, and over the next 8 weeks I will post tours on everything from entertainment to the archive and themes in between. I hope you'll come back and visit, and also read more about my thoughts on these themes on my blog, algene.wordpress.com. Today I will take you on a tour of 7 videos which will take about highlighting what our research methods were and modes of expression that we created to communicate the ideas that we had and what we learned, how the architecture of YouTube failed us as we attempted to learn about it by using it, and how we handled those failures of the architecture, how we hacked YouTube to make it a more conducive site for higher education. Now, obviously, YouTube wasn't made for us. It wasn't built with our needs in mind. It doesn't need us. It hardly knows we exist. And yet, I believe, and I think my students will express in the videos that you see, that the specific ways it failed us as students and learners engaged in attempting to understand this piece of popular culture speak more broadly about the organization of the site, who it serves, how it serves them, why it serves them, and what it isn't doing at this time. So I hope you'll pay attention to that as you watch the tour. This tour is also being produced as a talk that I will give at an academic conference called the DIY Summit, which is occurring at USC February 8th to 10th of 2008. And instead of speaking, I will play this video and the videos that follow. I think that the fact of this tour and the experience of this tour raises 6 binaries, which I'd like to end with, that I feel radically affected my ability to teach and my students' ability to learn using YouTube. So let me be clear. I would suggest that in a typical academic environment, in a classroom, there are 6 binaries that are quite stable, moderately stable, and those structures allow a certain kind of learning to occur. When we tried to learn on YouTube, these 6 binaries were destabilized and produced a new kind of learning and a difficult kind of learning. And I'd like you to pay attention to these themes as they're raised in the tour today. Those binaries are the public-private binary, the distinction between the cyber and the real, the distinction typically held in place between oral culture and visual culture, or the dominance of one or the other, distinctions between entertainment and education, between the amateur and the expert, and between control and chaos. And let me just end by suggesting that this tour is an attempt on my part to reclaim some kind of control, the kind of control that is needed in higher education in the kind of chaotic field which is YouTube. We found that it was almost impossible to create uniform viewing experiences of the site, to link, build, add, to comment, to participate as a group in any way, to build community and build ideas together. It was very hard to navigate the site, even to navigate our class site. So this tour is my attempt to restabilize that. I hope that you'll learn a lot from the videos that I selected for you, and I hope you'll participate in the tour by commenting or putting videos onto the tour, therefore helping us in our hack of YouTube to be a more conducive site for the building of ideas, for the creation of community around criticism, and for the ongoing analysis of media culture within media culture. Thanks.
That's where I'm posting.
everybody, this is Ben Hecht, and this is my video post for the topic, what can YouTube teach us? What I think the really interesting thing about what YouTube can teach us has to do with the variety and range of the videos that YouTube brings to the table. On one hand, you can watch a presidential debate. On the other hand, you can watch a guy teaching how to take a beer bong. So I think it's that limitless supply of knowledge that can be dumped into YouTube by its users is really what makes it so important as a teaching tool. It's just that overflowing of knowledge upon knowledge upon knowledge, everyone's opinion, everyone's thoughts. So I thought today I would do a little teaching of my own over YouTube, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about myself in a segment that I like to call 5 Things About Ben. So, this is the 5 Things About Ben board, and we will start with the bottom one, and that says V card, and I don't know, I lost my virginity at 16. I'm not really sure if that's appropriate, but whatever, we're going with it. Alright, at number 4, I lose stuff, mostly sweatshirts and belts, sometimes my mind, depends on how hard the week is. Alright, at number 3, dunk contest. When I was in high school, I got the highest score at a tournament's dunk contest by pulling my jersey over my head and dunking the ball. I knew I could see through the jersey. No one else did. I got like a 48 out of 50. It was great. At number 2, Kelly Kapowski. I've just always had the biggest crush on Tiffany Amber Thiessen. That's all I can say about that. I'll have a crush on her forever. And at number 1, the gold medal. My stepdad won the gold medal at the 76 Olympics for the 400 freestyle. 20 minutes after the Olympic Committee called him in, they said, we're taking your medal away for a banned substance. Just recently they found out that it wasn't a performance enhancer, so we'll see what happens there. But hope you learned something about me. I think I learned something making it. This is Ben Hecht.
I guess I'd just like to respond to the question of YouTube being able to obtain, status as an intellectual forum and its effectiveness versus text-based things. I do think that less bias interpretation goes into written text as opposed to a video rant. It's very hard to come across as sincere and to not edit yourself up on the soapbox doing a performance. It is a performance. They're filming themselves, they're putting themselves out there, and so they know that more is coming across than just their message. Whereas in a text-based rant, it can be read different ways, but it is what it is. Whereas you have a video recording of yourself going on this rant, you're being judged on your looks and the way you talk and what you're wearing and the setting you're in, and that all plays an important role in the message as well. By a small community, YouTube is a small intellectual forum, but on a much larger scale, it's just a place where people go for entertainment. In modern and contemporary art history, something needs to kind of explode and become more than itself before it can be broken down and evolve into something better and new. And I think that's where YouTube's at right now. I think it's at the point where it has, so to say, jumped the shark and now needs to do something else to evolve into something better, something worthwhile, something with content, a democratic forum, a global classroom. So my question is, where are we going? How do we get there? What are we doing?
There could be a couple of reasons for this. First, instead of downloading or purchasing a song, listening to it on YouTube is a fast and free way to check it out. Secondly, people who enjoy music videos for the audio and the visual may use the site as a convenient alternative to MTV, VH1, or other channels in which they do not control when the video is played. That being said, I'm still pretty surprised at the predominance of this format. I guess somewhere in the back of my mind I'm imagining record labels paying their minions minimum wage to watch Rihanna and Avril Lavigne over and over and over again. From a flutist who can beatbox at the same time, to quick-changing dancing artists, to strange guitar effects, to the wrapping of a McDonald's order, these kinds of talents were most likely very strange and or impressive in their rarity and sometimes in their difficulty. The question is, amongst all the very, very strange talents that appear on YouTube, and Lord knows there are many, many more, many stranger and many more impressive, why do the ones with musical components rise to the top? I suggest for the same reason that many of us carry our iPods around from class to class, rarely drive a car in silence, and have probably never seen a silent film the whole way through. Wear the email while you surf the web, while you check your voicemail, while you watch YouTube generation, and it appears we need stimulation. There were videos that used music as a backdrop for photos, as an emotional technique. There were videos that used it for humor, or to truly showcase their singing talents, or some combination of these. Overall, these videos couldn't do just one of the things I've mentioned. Strange and talented? Sure. Funny and weird? Yep. Talent with humor. You got it. I mean, if we use the term loosely.
I like pretty things. I like funny things. I like my hi-hats on 8 notes. Basic, don't double up the flow. I ride the beat, you chase it. Hennessy straight with the lemon squeeze to quench. Sounds from the town, they pound with intent. Experiment with this like it's different cause it is. They make the norm in the...
The latest rage for kids is driving parents and entire neighborhoods crazy. It's called a whistle tip, and it's welded inside a car's muffler to make the car screechingly loud for nearly a mile.
Anybody that has it in their neighborhood is going to be totally driven crazy.
It sounds like when you want to woo-woo, it's that woo-woo. You know what I'm saying?
Work at home. I can't concentrate when it goes on for hours.
Some neighbors are saying way too loud. That's only in the morning. You're supposed to be up cooking breakfast or somebody, and so that's like an alarm clock. Woo-woo!
To me, it look like a leprechaun to me. All you gotta do is look up in the tree. Who else in the leprechaun say yeah?
Eyewitnesses say the leprechaun only comes out at night. If you shine a light in its direction, it suddenly disappears. This amateur sketch resembles what many of you say the leprechaun looks like. This guy helping to direct traffic says he's prepared for his encounter with the leprechaun. He's suited up from head to toe.
This water's off spells right here. This is a special leprechaun flute, which has been passed down from thousands of years ago from my great-great-grandfather who was Irish. I just came to help out.
I went to the Levine yesterday, get some pants for me and my niggas. I was gonna steal them, I ain't heard no money.
One, YouTube is not a good site for higher learning. It is hard to learn from YouTube. Two, YouTube's architecture and ownership undermine fundamentals of academic inquiry. depth of dialogue, the ability to find and link data, the ability to sustain intimate and committed community, and structures of order and discipline. 3. YouTube is a good site for entertainment, a postmodern television tuned to the intimate needs of the individual user. 4. YouTube's architecture and ownership rely upon popularity, humor, speed, shallowness, celebrity, and distraction. 5. YouTube's standard fare is the funny and fast, ironic or sincere video that self-referentially refers to dominant media and corporate culture. 6. YouTube's standard fare is the simple, expressed common knowledge, talents, or feelings of everyday people. 7. People use YouTube to waste time, but also to meet people, communicate, share ideas, and art. 8. YouTube uses its users to self-censor, and what rises and falls reflects the best and worst of our society's dominant ideas and values, and usually the worst. 9. YouTube's corporate imperatives foreclose democracy in the name of freedom. 10. An unparalleled archive of moving images on YouTube, teeming just beneath the surface of numbers and rankings, can be seen every community, image, issue, style, or critique found in our culture. However, these underliers are limited by the conditions already set forth. 11. YouTube is an ideal secondary source to be linked with other tools for those who wish to use it against its own aims. 12. For instance, in learning from YouTube, we are beginning to model a new form of academic exchange based upon the concise summary of complex ideas expressed through words, sounds, and images, and open to the public. 12. In conclusion, at the midterm, I feel comfortable claiming that we have learned a great deal on and about YouTube, and thus, it is a good site for higher learning.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to hold the questions until the end of the panel and the end of the respondent. So our next panelist is Tenmori Sundarajan, who is executive director of an organization called Third World Majority, and she is also a filmmaker, singer, and grassroots media organizer. She was featured in 2003 in both Utne magazine as one of the 30 visionaries under 30, and in Source magazine as one of the top 10 political forces in hip-hop.
Well, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. So I was actually going to start with a video and then actually go into 7 years of our history as a grassroots media organization and then end with a film. So I know we've been watching a lot of media, but just bear with me and then we'll get back to it.
Do you know me? Do you know who we be? I am knowledge seeking myself. You stole our history, made yourself the hero, and then charged us admission to see a vision of our ancestors trapped in a glass box. From glass box to idiot box, I am not the crack whore, target of war, robber, rapist, video girl. If there is so much reality TV, how come I never see the real me? www.wherethehellibe.com.net.org.please. If the internet and cyberspace are the sum total of human experience, why again is the human experience defined not to include me? When I search for myself, young, black, Asian, Chicana, beautiful, and free, I find 10 entries of porn and 10 portals of lost dreams. Who builds it is different than who codes it, is different than who uses it. I am the mother warrior. I am the sister soldier. I am dreaming the revolution of self that begins with me and my womb. It is the magic of our people, the third world majority, one nation under hip-hop elevating self, beginning one block at a time, we speak the truth of her story. As we have always known it and continue to build it, we struggle within the belly of the beast, against police brutality, prisons, the INS, against bad schools, no-wage jobs, and gentrification. against violence and genocide in our minds, our bodies, and spirits. As new mystics, new MCs, new prophets, new DJs, new organizers, new breakers, new parents, new graph writers, new poets, and new dreamers. Expressing the 5 elements, we define the world in our own image, with each lyric, tag, poem, beat, and song. We organize our communities in a culture of resistance. I know me. We know who we be. We are knowledge, seeking ourselves.
So I wanted to start off with that film because stay on mic. So I wanted to start with that film because that film was actually made 7 years ago when we first started as an organization on Adobe Premiere, when it took 9 hours to render a second film. But I think one of the things that was really incredible was the political potency of that film, and how when we still show it, it's traveled around the world as part of our curriculum and our festivals, the resonance of the communities that we work about not being seen but still needing to be heard is still really powerful, and is one of the main reasons why we do the work that we do, both as third world and third cinema filmmakers, but also as media justice organizers. And that's a little bit of what I was going to talk about today. So I think one of the things, when we first started, I was like 18 or 19 when we started Third World Majority. I think for us, the question was really about, what does media equity look like? And at that time, I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley, and I was also a grassroots organizer. And when we were talking about media equity at that time, this was actually before Final Cut Pro launched. So at that time, digital video wasn't really quite there yet. And the only models for political filmmaking that we were very lucky to be introduced to at UC Berkeley was Third Cinema. And Third Cinema just captured our minds and our imaginations. And we're very participatory in our process, and so I just wanted to see, is there someone who could do a quick definition of Third Cinema for people? I know there's a lot of different people here. So is there someone who's willing to do a quick definition of what Third Cinema is? I thought this was an academic panel. Okay, so anyone? I do have candy right here I could throw out in the audience. I know it's right after lunch. Third Cinema? Well, Third Cinema, as we experienced it, was definitely about a lot of the revolutionary filmmaking that was connected to the self-determination movements in the 70s. And going at that time at UC Berkeley, we were part of a wave of affirmative action. The launch against affirmative action started on our campus. And I think from that process, we really became politicized as individuals, and it became part of our political imagining of what we wanted to do in terms of changing the media system. And so a lot of the imagery that we use is connected to the Matrix and talking about taking the red pill versus the blue pill. And I think for us, when we talked about taking the red pill of media justice, I think one of our questions, especially in a relationship to Third Cinema, is that while Third Cinema very specifically looked at creating a media that was connected to the revolutionary struggles of those peoples, I think for us as political filmmakers, we were looking at how do we create revolutionary media in the context of a concentrated media system, one in which, whether from transmission to content, it is at all levels corporate and privatized. So to talk about the ways that you actually use it for revolution and self-determination is kind of undermined by who exactly owns the tools. But to be able to have that conversation with organizers, really requires a lot of deep work, because you can't just go up in there and talk about concentrated media monopoly. So I think we really struggle with the ways that we could really bring that to the communities that we work with. And so I think one of the things that we had to really pull out for people was both the structure and ownership, the relationships in production, and also in a language and culture that was relevant to the communities that we work with. And a lot of the communities that we work with are actually people that don't have a formal relationship to the state. They've either been undocumented, or they are folks who have been incarcerated or have some relationship to the penal system, or because of their gender are not recognized by the state. And so for us to be able to work with those communities, we really needed to figure out another model. So I think one of the things for us in terms of what DIY media is that I think there's a lot of assumption that DIY media only includes video, but for a lot of the communities that we work with, we have people who don't have phone lines, let alone access to consistent computers.
So when we try and do our media literacy education, we really try and really encourage people to kind of think outside of the video box and look at the ways that they're always constantly creating and telling their stories in whatever media that they have access to. So being able to put that around for them, I think has always been really important for us to contextualize our work. And then also, I think, as you saw in Alex's presentation, video, especially in the way that it's used in the web, is very isolating. It's not community building. So even in the way that we teach video and the way that we teach filmmaking, we want to center community building as part of its curation. So when we're teaching film and video, we always have graffiti walls that are up. So we have graffiti artists who could be throwing stuff. We'll have DJs spinning, so people will actually be able to be breaking and talking. And the idea of being able to separate out from an individual artist aesthetics to what being a culture worker is really important to the way that we wanted to shift what the relationships of production look like. I think the other thing is most organizers and most of the people that we work with understand the negative ramifications of a concentrated media system in reference to the content. The questions of ownership and infrastructure are less clear. And I think we were really struggling to figure out ways that we could communicate that in a way that was relevant. And so I think one of the things we would do is, like, you know, we're all big sci-fi nerds, is that we took the metaphor of the Matrix and tried to really explain how to understand how media policy actually gets trickled down to us as consumers. And, you know, I think if you notice, like at the FCC, they're all wearing sunglasses, and so one of the questions we'd ask is, who wears the sunglasses in the Matrix? And of course you'd have grassroots organizers, but the agents. And so looking at agents as regulatory bodies and being able to create that metaphor so people would understand who creates the blueprint and the archetype for our media system, and then what are ways grassroots organizers can then impact that was really critical. And a lot of our production work was really connected to the grassroots mobilizations around the FCC and the continuing, you know, fight for democratizing media at a policy level. I think the other thing is also really being able to help organizers understand the relationship to the negative images that they have about their communities and how that actually creates policy. Because I think for most people who first come into our trainings, they have an understanding that what they're seeing is bad, and they may actually understand some of the way that it's been internalized, you know, on an emotional level. But the way that if we continually see images of young people criminalized, how that then shapes public opinion, because media is the place where we shape public opinion and therefore creates punitive policies for young people, is one of the steps we had to kind of walk some of the people and really think about ways we would do exercises around that. I think the other thing is also just breaking down who were the six companies that own and talk about the concentration of media. And this is another moment. So can people throw out who are the concentrated media monopoly companies? Bertelsmann AG, okay. Who else?
Time Warner.
Time Warner.
Disney ABC.
Disney. Viacom. News Corp. And there's one rhymes with Tavendi. Okay. And I think for a lot of people who aren't in the media realm, the sheer number of profits is staggering for a lot of people. And then we would then actually contrast this monetary figure with what the money could be used for instead of creating these huge media conglomerates. Like 20 billion would eliminate starvation and malnutrition. 12 billion would provide education to every child. 23 billion would reverse the spread of AIDS and malaria, and then contextualize in the UN Millennium Goals. And just to see that this small figure is the equivalent of one concentrated media monopoly's yearly profits is very shocking to most people, you know. So I think the other thing is also to look at the numbers of women and people of color who are actually owners of media institutions. Women are 51% of the population, but only own 67 stations or 3% of media outlets. And same thing for people of color, 33% of the population or 33.6%. So I think that when we look at a media that is racist and sexist and homophobic, you know, we can see a little bit where the money is going. I think also it was really critical for us is rethinking the relationships of production and going back to the model of where we kind of saw our agenda as political filmmakers as being able to look at the ways we could change the media structures we operate in. we really based our model off the freedom schools in the 1960s, where in order to be able to support people of color to be able to get the right to vote, there was these amazing popular education freedom schools, where the first piece of literature someone learned to read was the voter ballot. So they could immediately go right away to be able to implement what they've learned to read in their own political agency. And I think that's what's really critical about DIY media, is that if you only buy into the YouTube model, there is nowhere to go in terms of you having more agency other than being a consumer. But if you look at the way the Power Story has in terms of community building, and in terms of the way that we understand our relationships as community, we have to break outside of the consumption model. And so for us, we see creating media as a first step to us being able to own our own media system and being able to create parallel models to what is the corporate model. And I think that's what's going to be really exciting about hearing some of Sam's work and hearing all of our the other panelists. I think the other thing is that I think as political media makers, all of us at some level on this panel are going to talk about one of the big shifts that's happened over the past couple years is that there was an urgency in terms of do-it-yourself media about really getting people to access, because access was like this very difficult thing to get because the cost of the technology threshold was so high, you needed to be trained to do it. But now there's all this access and there's no ideology. There's no informative way that people understand and frame their story and content. It's why you see 30 million versions of Thriller by by like 90 people across the country, but we don't have meaningful dialogue about what healthcare policy should be by other people, right? And so I think for us, we've really struggled with the ways that we could really think about political aesthetics that would actually inform people both about the story that they want to tell and have it translate in a way that's actually very viewable. Because YouTube isn't really all that viewable. Like, it's kind of dull and boring and a little irritating sometimes, but it's better than doing work, so you watch YouTube, So I think one thing is to really figure out how to support true and authentic voice. And I was talking about this with Alex before the panel. A lot of times people come into our trainings not really sure about who they are separate from the media messages that have been created around them. So often the first piece of media that they'll create is a piece of media that replicates like a lot of their oppressive media. Like, I'll have young women that'll come in and they'll do video, they'll be video girls in their own video. I mean, Mariah Carey is like a big victim of that, But I think the other thing is also figuring out, also for a lot of our participants, is that a lot of our participants actually aren't very, have difficulty reading and writing. And so in order to be able to be reflective, a lot of the tools we have for reflection are written tools, like whether you're journaling or you're writing. So we had to figure out ways to support non-literate communities to be able to really get through to that place, that core authentic self when you turn off the TV and you are really your person. That we had to do a lot of exercises for that. And I think a lot of it for us was like popular education exercises. So we'll often build off of skits and have people direct each other and learn the process of directing from doing skits. Like, we very rarely ever do lecture style, even in teaching Photoshop or Final Cut. And all of our technical trainings are done in a participatory way. There's lots of singing, there's lots of candy being thrown, all in a way to be able to get people out of individual boxes of who they are. I think the other thing is to also look at distribution for community building, because I think one of the caveats around using virtual tools for distribution is that the way that you observe and use virtual tools are primarily as individuals. And when you tell a story, you never tell a story just for an individual. You tell a story to a circle. That's the first way that you told a story, was in front of a fire. And so for us, it's really important to really contextualize the way that we use media, not only in the context of other kinds of media, but like when we have film screenings, we have open mics. Once again, we'll like showcase other artscapes, and we'll try as much to create a circle versus like just one way of consumption and participation. And then I think I want to just give an example, like where one of the exercises is, we talk a lot about how you can flip the script to tell our stories. Because the other thing is, when you finally have organizers wanting to tell a story, let's say about, we did a recent set of workshops in the Midwest with communities that were impacted by the meatpacking raids. So they're very isolated Latino communities who are very recently immigrated, and half of the community was decimated when ICE went into the meatpacking plants and like basically took people door to door with machine guns. And so in talking about the debate around immigration, if you only listen to the way that it's framed in the mainstream media, you always hear criminal alien or illegal alien. You know, I'm not really sure when a human became illegal. I don't understand how that could happen. But to be able to walk people through a process where they're deconstructing their own frames, we actually do this thing where there's a hula hoop, and that we put one person in the middle, and then we put the hula hoop, and everybody throws into the hula hoop the way people define that particular issue. And then we take them out of the hula hoop by thinking of alternative ways to frame that. Like, what's another way to reframe immigration that doesn't look at criminalization, so that we can examine the values and the system of oppression that's going into framing that. So I think that's some of the ways that we do that, and we do an example with like Hurricane Katrina, this was a pretty famous like set of images around what was seen as looting and what was seen as salvaging during Hurricane Katrina. I think the other thing that we also really like to do is to look at historical models, at the way that certain movements and certain political moments were censored in the mainstream media, but the way that people got their stories out, whether it was through chants or through dance or through oral history, and using those examples as ways that people can break through to the media system. So I know that I have only 5 minutes left, so I wanted to end with a quick thing of our DVD, because this is kind of where we see a lot of our work going. And if I can get it to play.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
To give you a little taste of what the trainings are like, and you know, we can ask when we get to the question part, we can go into that. But thank you.
Okay, and while we're switching computers, I'll do a quick intro for Sam Gregory, who is a human rights activist, advocacy trainer, and video producer. He is currently the program director of Witness, an initiative that uses video and online technologies to raise awareness of human rights violations, to promote public engagement, and to encourage policy change. Sam has worked in collaboration with human rights organizations around the world, particularly in Burma, including co-producing the recent video Shoot on Sight, the ongoing military junta offensive against civilians in eastern Burma from 2007, which we actually have programmed a clip of in the Saturday night featured Video 24/7 program. We did that without realizing that Sam was one of the producers of it, and it was a fortuitous convergence that he's here physically and also his videos in the program. So I think we're ready, and Sam Gregory.
Hi. Do you hear me? A little bit of a croaky voice, so I'm going to try and make it through. So I just want to level to start with around the perspective I'm coming from, and it's such a pleasure to be on the panel with Alex and Tamori, both people I've admired a lot. I come from the perspective of a human rights advocate and someone who uses video as a tool for change. So very much a human rights framework, a tools framework, and an advocacy framework. So everything I'm going to talk about coming into this talk is looking at particularly online video in that context. To anchor this, let me take you back about 15 years to Rodney King. This is an image that's familiar to pretty much anyone the world over. I can show it in a workshop in Guatemala, in Nigeria, in Australia, and people will recognize this image and essentially know what it stands for. And this image and the surrounding context provided the impetus for the creation of Witness, which is the organization where I work. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Witness and a little bit about what we've done over the past 10 years, because it'll help ground what I think of as the future in terms of online video. So I want to talk a little bit about video over the past 10 years, which clearly builds on a rich tradition of tactical media and of video activism that people who are lucky enough to go down to the screenings that John was having downstairs is something that's been a 40-year tradition, certainly here in the US. So we were founded in 1992, shortly after the Rodney King incident demonstrated the galvanizing potential of what you might call amateur handheld video in the right place and the right time. Our mission is fairly simple. It's to empower people to use video and online technologies to open the eyes of the world to human rights violations and to transform personal stories of abuse into powerful tools for justice, promoting public engagement, policy change. And we do that in 3 ways. One is that we work very closely with around 12 to 15 human rights organizations around the world. We train them, we support them, we stand by their side as they create their own media as part of advocacy campaigns. The advocacy comes from them, it doesn't come from us. Another thing we do is we share the best practices we learn in that with a much broader community. We produce books, we do an annual training institute in Montreal this July, which will bring together about 30 human rights activists to learn how to use video in their campaigns. And most recently, we've launched a participatory media website called The Hub. And that's what I'll focus on later on in the talk, just to talk about some of the challenges we've been encountering in trying to mesh together human rights advocacy with online video. 2 key dimensions to Witness's approach. Firstly, like many alternative media groups, we focus on the empowered voice of those who are closest or closer to human rights violations, be they victims, survivors, community members, or engaged advocates on behalf of affected communities. This is a member of a video team that works on the Thai-Burma border, documenting atrocities in eastern Burma. Please note it's not an ad for Sony. I wish I'd photoshopped that out. And secondly, and hitherto, we've sought to use what I'd call smart narrowcasting rather than broadcasting to reach key audiences. I'm going to loop back to that later because I think there's an interesting challenge. How do you do smart narrowcasting in an online world, and is that the right choice for video and advocacy? So we began in the early 90s as an organization that gave out hundreds of cameras to human rights groups around the world, assuming they'd be able to gather footage that could get on television or be used as evidence. It was a moment of what one scholar has termed 1990s technophilia and a model of change based on the transparency of media. It was also grounded in a perhaps naive belief in the indexicality of the image, the idea of seeing is believing. And so even as I look at what's happening now, I do sometimes wonder whether in another moment of technophilia. So I'm just going to throw that out as maybe a salutary reminder that we had that moment in the early 90s as well. But the model as it stood was ineffective, inefficient, and frustrating. Now imagine what happens if you give hundreds of cameras to human rights groups without training, you give it to them without skills in how to do storytelling, and perhaps most importantly, you don't find the audiences that they can effectively reach with that video. The problem was that we began with an assumption drawn on the Rodney King experience. If you think back to Rodney King, it was very anomalous. You had one dimension of it, which was massive media attention to a single act of atrocity. And that's clearly not typical of most human rights footage or issues. To give an example, I work with a group in Papua, Indonesia. They're focused on the systematic, ongoing, and pervasive exclusion of indigenous Papuans in an economy dominated by migrants, and in a justice system that moves rarely against perpetrators, and particularly rarely against its own government. So in that context, they face the triple barrier of government censorship, public lack of attention, and an issue that is not reducible to the blow of a baton. So media was not, at the start, a particularly viable option. Similarly, the other aspirational hope was that you would use video as evidence. And most of you will know how how troubling and difficult that became in the Rodney King case, where the video footage was slowed down, used frame by frame to demonstrate that, in fact, Rodney King was resisting arrest and that the police officers were demonstrating proper technique. As a consequence of this set of experiences, what we settled on working over the past 5 or 6 years was working with these human rights groups to identify within their campaigns for change new and relevant advocacy-oriented audiences for visual evidence and testimony. And then what we did with them is find ways to break through an information-cluttered environment and target a particular audience. The way we think about it is as videos for a reason, not about an issue. So every time you make a video, you do it because you know it will speak to a particular audience. Shame them, motivate them, engage them. So to give you some examples of the kinds of videos that might mean, it might mean submitting video into a court. We just submitted a video in the African Court of Human and People's Rights, the first time that anyone has seen video there. So how do you disrupt that space? By placing a video in there, by bringing the potency of someone complaining directly to a judicial decision maker about what's happening. Or we work with community members, for example, on the Thai-Burma border or in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, working on child soldier recruitment. So you produce a video to start a discussion in a community. And we work doing direct-to-decision maker advocacy. How do you persuade a congressional committee? How do you put the evidence right in front of them? Yet we're now at a point in our evolution where maybe that technique will not work. So I'm going to change direction a little bit. It's clearly a truism to acknowledge the depth of corporate and government surveillance in our lives. We've heard about it a little bit of some of the other panels. Donald Rumsfeld famously commented on Abu Ghraib, and I love this quote, "We're functioning in the information age where people are running around with digital cameras and taking these unbelievable photographs and then passing them off against the law to the media, to our surprise, when they had not even arrived at the Pentagon." So when Donald Rumsfeld worries, that's a sign of hope, perhaps. So David this morning talked a little bit about the ubiquity of the video camera. So I'm not going to talk about it there. Just take that as a given, that in some senses it's becoming increasingly prevalent that ordinary citizens have access to the technology. And they have access to a mode of distribution in the form of online video sites. So what questions does this pose for human rights advocacy, for video for action? What are the possibilities? What are the perils? I want to introduce our hub project as the framework for this discussion, but I'm not advocating this as the only solution. I'm just putting it forward to show you something that we're trying to do in this environment. It's a project that seeks to use online video and other media as a conduit for community building and action. It brings some of the lessons learned in the offline world of advocacy to the online world. This is it here. Essentially, it allows users to upload footage, to join groups that work around particular human rights issues, to create their own profiles and identities to affiliate with other profiles, and obviously to browse through in terms of different countries, different regions, different issues. The element that we've tried to build into it that for us is what is missing in YouTube is the power to contextualize and to take action. Because what we've seen is that the effectiveness of human rights video is in those two elements. And also the challenges. If you think about a lot of human rights video, it's telling transnational stories. It's trying to share something, some isolated moment of atrocity, some insight into a structural problem, and it's trying to bring it to a distant audience. And so part of the real importance is how do you contextualize that in a way that is meaningful and doesn't demean it or even reduce its efficacy as a tool for action. So the two things we've focused on are contextualization and action. Now I want to show two clips, and then I'm going to refer back to them in the second part of the discussion. The first clip is from Egypt. Excuse me, I put the volume up a bit. Apologies. And the second clip is actually, I'll just show an excerpt from the Burma video that, in fact, I'm going to show it on YouTube to save us time.
คือเลือกว่าวันนี้ลอกอะไรต้นหูเลยแต่ก็ได้แค่ปูดขาดแต่ฉีกปกติมากพอแบบประมาณบุบะแบบไม่คนเลยในดีดาวหลอดดีเลยเป็นสิ่งอย่างละปกติมีเลยแต่สเปรย์บุบมีบุบะไม่คือหรอกนายในดาวมาตาดอกบดีเลยเข้มชีนี่ดาวมาตาดอกบดีเลยอุลาเลยกว่าเดะอัตราชกหัวคุณ
In November 2005, at the start of the dry season, the Burmese army launched a series of deadly offensives against ethnic-current areas in eastern Burma. These attacks have continued through the rainy season, displacing at least 20,000 people and leaving villagers with no opportunity to tend their crops. The displaced live in makeshift camps in the forests and fields.
So two very different kinds of clips, and actually I would say those are probably typical of the two kinds of clips we're seeing on the hub. One is probably falls again into a phrase from this morning, a sort of witness journalism kind of clip, an image of atrocity. The other is an autonomously produced piece of finished media from a grassroots group, in this case a group called Burma Issues on the Thai-Burma border. As Steve mentioned, I was involved as a producer on this. I would describe myself as a consulting producer in the sense that this clip was entirely filmed, shot, and edited by a grassroots group of refugees. I provide feedback to them about how to think about some of the audiences they're trying to reach. So anyway, two examples there of clips that we're seeing on the hub. So a question first of all, why not use YouTube or LiveLeak or Dailymotion or another of those kinds of venues? The reason is the hub is posed as an alternative that addresses some of the ideological, philosophical, and actual action needs of concerned citizens who might use this. First off, clearly is the question of where material finds itself, human rights material finds itself in the torrent of YouTube material. And this has obviously been a refrain that people have been coming back to. A recent Center for Social Media study found that the most popular social justice video is 150 times less popular than the most popular video. So this is very marginal content. And the content that is powerful is content that has that spectacle. What Henry Jenkins has described perhaps as that vaudevillian kind of performing for the camera. You know, there are examples out there that circulate that way. I think one very powerful human rights example, if people haven't seen it, and this is not what I would call DIY media, I would call it viral online media, is the Unsubscribe Me campaign, which I hope people are familiar with this video. If you see the image, you should be familiar with it, I hope. Has anyone seen this? Yes. Here, essentially, Amnesty recreated what it is like to be held in a stress position. If you watch that for 6 minutes, you'll feel very directly the pain which the man who is a performance artist went through. He was in it for 6 hours. So for me, this is an example of a very powerful kind of video that would penetrate through the chatter. But note that it focuses on an individual and it focuses on torture, both of which are almost easy to portray as human rights issues. Another aspect is what happens to human rights videos when they are on YouTube. I used the YouTube clip of the Burmese video because I wanted to show a little bit about what the comments were around this. This is a video that had over 1/3 of a million hits. It was one of the top 25 videos on YouTube at a point. These comments, these might actually be vaguely positive. In general, the comments were racist, they were xenophobic, they were anti-human rights in the extreme. So as a mode for discussion, and this goes back to Alex's comment, it was very ineffective. It was very hard to turn basically a transitory audience into an engaged public. A few other reasons why we're trying to think of conscious alternatives to YouTube. One is, and I draw these mainly from what the Transmission Network, which many of you may be familiar with, has called their No Screwtube campaign, highlighting reasons why activists might choose ethical alternatives to YouTube. Exploitation, clearly YouTube makes revenue off your videos. Surveillance, YouTube is watching who you are and where you come from. On the Hub, for example, we don't track IP addresses because that's the easiest way to find out where someone comes from if you're subpoenaed. Sharing isn't really sharing on YouTube, and we've touched on this in the context of the discussion around peer-to-peer this morning. You can't share peer-to-peer in the truest essence on YouTube, and they don't make it easy for you to download and use it in offline screenings, which in activist contexts are the really important way to use a video. It's to take it offline. Free isn't free in the open source context. YouTube is not a free and open source platform, clearly. And editorial control is not in the hands of the community. We've seen that in the case of human rights videos. Wael Abbas, who was an Egyptian activist, his videos were taken down about 2 months ago for reasons that weren't clear, but for a human rights content producer, it's entirely arbitrary in some senses whether your material will be taken down or not. So Witness launched the Hub on December 10th last year, so it's only been up about 6 weeks. So I'm just going to pose some questions now, which actually I'm as much soliciting feedback as giving answers. What are the implications of this kind of ubiquity of image creation and distribution for human rights work? For the creation of action. One question, does intention matter anymore? And if you look at the Egyptian video, that was shot by a policeman. He shot that in order to humiliate those police officers, those bus drivers, the young man you see, and in order to send it to his friends and to encourage other people not to do it. Abu Ghraib, the cell phone footage of Saddam Hussein, the pivotal moments of online video in some sense, or at least of digital photo sharing and online video, are ones where it was the abuser who did it. So I think there's a question for us there. How do we wrestle with that philosophically and morally? What are the boundaries between the conflicting values of rights to freedom of expression and respect for privacy? I know we talk about being in a Facebook generation where we have a different expectation of privacy, but this, in our human rights context, doesn't work so well. On a theoretical level in human rights, you talk about an inherent right to human dignity. It underlies every declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And on a practical level, although we continue to de-emphasize privacy and emphasize transparency, the realities of human rights risk have not changed in tandem. Think about Burma. We admired, we thrilled to, we were excited, me personally, about those images coming out of Burma. Ever since then, the Burmese authorities have tracked down everyone they saw in the images and tracked down their associates and the next person along. I think this is a reminder we should not be deluded by too many images of transparency or of reciprocal transparency. The overall power balance generally remains asymmetrical between repressive governments and individuals. The second question in human rights is, what about informed consent? Witness has long propagated a model based on medical, professional standards of informed consent, based on disclosure, comprehension, voluntariness. How does that work in an online environment? Particularly in a human rights context where we emphasize the rights of the victim and survivor, to be protected, to not be re-victimized, to not be represented unfairly. Now I pose that not that I know an answer, but to throw out a really important question once we use online video to engage in more than batting back and forth of opinions or of funny jokes. A question that will also arise, we were looking earlier at Yahoo Live, and if we look at, say, Quick, or any of those kind of models where you can broadcast directly, event cast, how does that work in a human rights context, where even the potential of someone being able to block footage that violates someone's rights or puts them in danger is stopped, because there's no filter. Everything just glides onto the screen. Another question, how does remix culture relate to human rights culture? A key aspect of our contemporary culture is the participatory ability to remix, annotate, change, reappropriate, comment. And from a human rights advocacy point of view, this has positive dimensions. The opportunity to be a co-producer rather than just a viewer. It promotes engagement. You can have a participatory network of peer producers creating human rights content for you. The rub is in how this relates to a human rights culture that is concerned for the dignity and integrity of victims and survivors and the role of ethical witnessing. As it would be said, the one who carries the continued memory of suffering, the witness for suffering, carries the responsibility to do so in a manner that empathizes with rather than violates the victim. Now, we laugh at George Bush when he's remixed. Would we laugh if that was a Burmese victim, a survivor of torture, or a sweatshop worker? A final question. How do we motivate action? And this goes back to what I said, where I come from. Part of it is concerned about human rights and about people who suffer human rights abuses. The other is how we turn that into action. I believe the key to successful engagement with human rights video is the process of responsibly moving testimony and images between settings, of creating transnational or internally national stories, when we're talking about the internalized third world or developing world within our own northern countries. And how do we generate action out of these? How are meaningful and ethical stories generated and circulated and acted upon in a venue to date that has prioritized short-form, raw footage and that values highly postmodern values, irony, humor, cynicism, and popular culture? Tom Sherman, in assessing that video as the new everyman's vernacular, the people's medium of 2007, and beyond poses to traditional video artists, notes that vernacular video characterizes the vernacular video characteristics of YouTube. As he describes it, in its noisy torrent of immense proportions, the people's video is influenced by advertising, shorter and shorter attention spans, the excessive use of digital effects, the seductiveness of slow-mo and accelerated image streams, a fascination with crude animation and crude behavior, quick and dirty voiceovers, and bold graphics that highlight a declining appreciation of written languages. It will also be permeated by mediated horror, from the capturing of natural and man-made catastrophe. In a world where video makers are a dime a dozen, Sherman observes that video artists, his concern primarily, must introduce their brand of video aesthetics into the vernacular torrents. They must earn their audience through content-driven messages. Human rights activists face the same challenge: how to access an audience without losing their integrity in conveying stories, and while maintaining a message that will generate action. In the Hub, we have taken a first step to address this by focusing on creating and fostering a community oriented towards contextualization and action, recognizing also that online environments where no one listens to others and responds constructively are the opposite of the empowerment of voice that grounds witness. As Howard Rheingold has observed in relation to youth participation, in an analogy that could easily be extended to overstretched, marginalized human rights group, it isn't voice if nobody seems to be listening. As to what will work to create meaningful action, this is my challenge to this room. I imagine the answer lies in two interlocked strategies. On the one hand, there will continue to be value in building a powerful strategic communications approach where some assumptions of current video advocacy do apply. The Hub or equivalent site is seen as the platform or means of distribution from a video to a creator to a defined audience. This particularly lends itself to dispersed audiences. For example, if we talk about the diaspora around Tibet, or Burma, or East Timor, or to transnational networks such as sex workers, trade union activists, or anti-trafficking advocates. But we will still need to develop the storytelling strategies that resonate with that audience and work for the online medium. And we'll have to find a way to make the transition between viewing and acting as seamless as possible. In many cases, I believe also this will have to interlock with a DWO, doing with others approach, maybe not just a DIY approach, that draws on the participatory potential of online video and recognizes the advocacy possibilities of drawing on some audiences as co-producers and not as consumers of advocacy video. This approach has been called in other contexts in human rights work, network-centered advocacy, in which, whereas in a traditional advocacy, the advocate organization picks and packages an argument for delivery to the audience, a network-centric approach asks the network to find, package, and select the arguments. A classic example would be the MoveOn.org 30 seconds Bush ads. That's my time warning, clearly. I've gone a minute over already. Via platforms like the Hub, the aspiration is that human rights organizations like Witness, as well as grassroots human rights activists and engaged citizens, can use online video as a tool to effectively draw on both the wisdom of crowds, but also perhaps the energy and importance of crowds to generate and sustain innovative advocacy. This is my open invitation. If people can think of really powerful ways to link online video to effective action, either by dispersed audiences or by particular audiences, we would love to hear. The reason we created the Hub is to help support that possibility. Thank you.
Okay, and while we again switch computers, I will do a slow introduction of Juan Devis, who is an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and director whose work I have admired and followed here at USC for many years as part of the Los Angeles Leadership Academy. He has also worked in both commercial and nonprofit media, narrowing the gap between art and commerce, social change and entertainment. Devis is currently a new media producer at KCET, the PBS affiliate here in Los Angeles, where he is in charge of all web original content and initiatives, including web stories, KCET's multimedia webzine, and the gaming initiative funded by the CPB. So, and I think we're ready. Juan Devis.
Hi, everybody. That is going to be hard to follow, I have to say. So, you know, I had all this stuff prepared, but I think after that, the presentations that everybody has done, I think I'm going to concentrate on just one part of this entire initiative that we're having at KCET. Anybody here watches KCET? Cool. All right. Well, one of the reasons I was called back in 2005 by the vice president of New Media to see if I wanted to start to produce online original content, local content for KCET was because there was a big chunk of a big demographic that we were not reaching, which was basically sort of the 18 to 35. And also a lot of local programming was started to disappear, and it seemed that the web was sort of the perfect place to start to explore how a local PBS station could you know, address this. I was not born here in LA. I was born in Colombia, and when I came to LA, I think it was 1994, and it was the hardest city to get adjusted to. And I think that a lot of those who are not born here in LA that have come here, I think, share the same experience. And ultimately, after maybe 4 or 5 years that you're here, if you stay here, LA sort of becomes this amazing place. I love LA. And in a way, with this project and with this series called Web Stories, we wanted to celebrate what goes on in LA, what communities are doing in LA, both in formal and informal ways, in political actions and in cultural venues. We wanted to be able to tap into all that energy and see what happened of it. The latest issue that we did is called Sustaining LA. And as you can see here, artists, activists, and citizens reimagine the city as a living environment, reclaiming its geography and resources. So the way that we have structured our series basically is we take this sort of general concept and we have editorial meetings of how to best approach the idea of sustainability, for example. And we look at groups, activist groups or artist groups or whoever it is that is working around this area, and we start to get the community that knows this community involved in actually helping us produce this. In Sustaining LA, In Sustaining LA, we invited a writer and critic called Bill Kelly Jr., to help us sort of find what art organizations and collectives were doing here to address the issue of sustainability in LA. And I guess this is not. It always happens, right? Always a little technical glitch. Let me see if I can open another window. So, this always happens to me, I have to say. So anyway, so we invited different people in the community to sort of help us understand what this idea of sustainability in LA was all about. And we found out this very interesting movement that is sort of going on here in LA. We decided to work with these 4 different collectives, artist collectives that were dealing with these issues. One of them was Fallen Fruit. Anybody here is familiar with Fallen Fruit at all? Okay. So one of them is Fallen Fruit, and basically what they do, they're doing this crazy thing of mapping every single public fruit tree in LA. I think those of us who live here in LA know that when you walk on the street, you find avocados or, here, I'm going to pause it for a second. You find avocados and loquats and, all all this stuff, and it just goes to waste. So this group decided that they were going to start to map neighborhood by neighborhood the public fruit trees and provide these maps to Angelinos so that they could go and actually pick up fruits and don't have to go to the supermarket. And we have, here I'll show you, we have some interactive maps that show us a little bit of what I'm talking about. This is Silver Lake, and they organize these night walks where they invite the community to go out with them and go and pick fruit, public fruit. And surprisingly enough, they have said that, a lot of the people in these neighborhoods are actually very friendly, and they encourage, the picking of fruits in the neighborhood. And again, it's not loading. It always happens to me. Anyway, go to the site and you can download these maps and take a look at them. But since we're talking about video, one of the things that we have decided to do in all these series is just to do a very bare bones sort of approach to doing interviews and editing them and actually using the environment as a friend and as a character, using LA as an important sort of person that we're also talking to. This is an interview that we did with Fallen Fruit, and it's in Silver Lake. And I'm going to let it run for a little bit. Oh, actually, this is not the interview. But let's see.
So that's the fruit, and you're the public.
Okay. So we just want Dr.
We're going to go off
the chin of the map down Larissa and go down across Descanso. There's some amazing trees on Larissa and at the corner of Descanso. Up Descanso, which is sort of famous for being a broken street with a tree we'll talk about. Down the piano box stairs, where Laurel and Hardy did their famous scene. We will cut down the next street to an amazing lemon and peach tree in the center islands, where that's been planted by the residents. Cut the corner to a very giving grapefruit and lemon tree. Down Robinson Street for some kumquats and loquats. Around the corner to more amazing fruit trees and bananas. Around to the best avocados you'll ever have in your life, but it's the wrong season. And then we're going to end on a bunch of loquat trees. And on the way, we're going to point out everything that isn't ripe yet. So they'll be ripe. We'll talk about what seasons, yada, yada, yada. The issues of picking. Hopefully, we'll meet some people we don't know. Have a good time. Ask lots of questions. I don't think we've had a group this big. So there's 3 of us you can ask questions about. I'm sure other people here are experts too.
This is David right here.
Oh, thanks.
This is Austin. And I'm Matthias. And thank you for coming.
Right.
We're really happy to see you.
We pre-picked some oranges. They're amazing. They're just not on the tour, and I thought we should share. So please feel free to take some. I have grocery bags, and we'll probably see if we can, borrow a shopping cart from the 99-cent store, and I'll bring it back later. All right, let's go.
Anyway, let me show you a little bit of the actual interview, and this I think shows you a little bit of the idiosyncrasy that we're having in the series that we're producing online.
Hi, I'm David Burns.
I am Matthias Wegener, and we're Fallen Fruit. We're part of a collaborative activist art project.
We're in Silver Lake. We're in pretty much the dead center of Silver Lake, a neighborhood that's been pretty, gentrified over the past 10 or 15 years. And what's nice about this neighborhood as an example of public fruit in Los Angeles specifically is that the trees have clearly been here longer than the residents that currently call this home, They're here first. Yeah, we started with mapping, and we started with mapping this neighborhood as an example.
Okay, and there are other people in this series, the LA Urban Rangers, which basically take the role of rangers, but they tell us sort of alternative histories of the environment in LA. And we are also having an event, if you guys want to go. It's a Malibu safari to find your rights as a public beachgoer in the beaches in Malibu, if you want to go. Also Farm Lab, I think some people here may know the famous and very controversial cornfield in Chinatown. So we had a conversation with them. And the last one was Fritz Hegg and his project called Edible States, which is basically an attack against the front lawn. And he's sort of suggesting and inviting people to get rid of their front lawn and actually make it into an edible space, an edible garden. So as I was saying this before, this sort of shows a little bit of the idiosyncrasy and sort of the tone that we have in this series that we're producing for KCT. And in a way, we're sort of trying to go back to what was produced in the 80s. It was a little more risky. It was a little more, less concerned about a lot of the things that right now PBS is concerned about. And now we're able to do that here locally. And actually, from a very humble beginning, we're starting to grow, and people are starting to see what we're doing here. But there's a project, a particular project that I have a lot of love for that we have done, and it's called Departures. And again, it happens to me all the time. And Departures is a series that we began, and basically was, everybody says that in LA you cannot walk. Everybody says that LA all looks the same. Everybody says that, etc., right? And also, with all these mapping engines and the Googles and all this sort of stuff, when you look at a city, the city looks exactly the same. So basically what we wanted to do is actually do the contrary. and try to prove that just one block in a neighborhood contains enough life, enough culture, enough history to trump everything that has been said about LA. This is the first in a series. Right now we're coming out with one in Watts. We're working one in Little Armenia, doing another one in Bel Air, believe it or not, and one in the LA River. So let me break you down what we have done. So we have a block, and this is Boyle Heights. For those of you who have been on First Street in Boyle Heights, anybody knows where the Mariachi Plaza is? All right. And that famous La Serenata de Garibaldi restaurant that the locals cannot eat because it's too expensive. But anyway, what we decided to do was, when you walk down a street, you're never fixed on one thing. You're fixed on multiple things, and your perspective is constantly changing. You hear things, you see different things, and we wanted to create sort of this environment where the actual audience, the user, could sort of experience a little bit of that dynamic that occurs when you're actually in that space. You know, you can hear the background, the noises that we were hearing at that time. And the other thing that we wanted to do is, you know, with this kind of projects, there's always that the need to bring a lot of historians and academics to sort of prove that what is going on there is authentic and valid and all this sort of stuff. And we decided to do actually the opposite, not invite any historian and just talk to the people that are there. And as we walked, we would bump into different people and talk to them. And also videotape them, make a portrait of them. Come on, load, please. There we go. So the idea that we had was, and this is the general idea for the entire series, is that hopefully in 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to have hundreds of portraits of Angelinos just like this, standing, vulnerable, in front of the camera while the world around them keeps on going. And they just they give us 1 minute of their time, right? And they talk to us.
My name is Lidia Avila Hernandez. I'm 23 years old. I was born and raised here in Boyle Heights. Work here, live here. I'm raising a family now. Went to school here. Boyle Heights is a very magical place. And sometimes it seems like a novel come to life. It's very, I always refer to it for folks that are from other parts of the country or other parts of LA. It's kind of like the Harlem of Latinos. You know, Boyle Heights is kind of like where Latino culture has really branched off of for other parts of the nation. It was the entryway for Mexican immigrants coming into the U.S. and it's really been kind of a, how would you say, like it's the home of so many art pieces, so many books, so many stories, so many chismes, so like it's so many families, and you know, la gente se va a otras partes del país, del mundo, pero siempre regresan because it's beautiful here. And although we get a bad rap, you know, we have a very specific culture and it's very unique because it's a blend. It's where there's magic here.
So it was, I mean, how as a public station do we explore the city that we live in? And, you know, a lot of questions have sort of come up after we produced this. There's a certain sense of closeness about this system. You know, it's a panorama that you navigate and you bring different people and you hear them. So one of the things that we're actually launching in our next series is it's a map where a lot of these videos are going to exist, and I'm going to show you another one. A lot of these videos are going to exist, and actually people are going to be able to upload their own videos or their own stories about the neighborhood. So that this becomes sort of the springboard or the platform for a dialogue about these different neighborhoods in LA to happen. Another character that we found, and I'll show you this video because I love it, is Marcelino. Marcelino is the owner of First Street Boxing. And I love his video. You're going to see why. You know, and it was amazing that I would be like, could you just stand 2 minutes in front of the camera and don't move? And they would not ask anything, and they're like, cool, all right, I'll do it.
I live not far from here, and you can see the difference. You drive 2 blocks from Sereno, and Boy House is different. It has its own personality, and people is very proud of the neighborhood. And I think that they are trying to get everything better. I think that those Queer Boulevard or East LA Boulevards, I don't remember the name of that theme in the series.
Anyway, the other thing was that as we produce these, and you tell me, Steve, when I need to stop. I have 5 minutes. When we produce this was also the idea that, okay, we have a template. How can we actually get the community involved in producing this? So the next series, which will come out in a month, and there's somebody sleeping over there. That hurts my feelings. Kidding. So, I'm sorry. So, one of the things that we did, next month we'll have Watts out, but one of the things that we did was actually write the instructions of how to build this, right? And we work with a community in Watts, an organization in Watts, a high school in Watts, to give them the instructions basically of how they can build their own, right? And this is a big sort of risk and exercise that we're doing to see if you can actually hand the instructions of the content, of how to produce the content to the community, and then they give it back to the public station to transmit. Here, I'll finish in just 1 second. Let me show you something. You have the policeman, Rene Chavez, and you have Homeboys Industries, which some of you may be familiar with. But I'll show you another video. Here, where are they? And this is when I realized you can pretty much explore whatever you want. Look at this video. All this man at 10:30 in the morning playing billiards and drinking beer just wanted to be in a portrait. This is all in YouTube, by the way, and on Blip TV. And this video has all these views. I don't know why, you know, but people seem to like it. So anyway, with this, I guess I'll wrap it up. And please go to kct.org, find web stories. There's tons more of content over there. We've partnered with, you know, the Getty, with Indie 103, with KCRW, so we work with DJs, curators, writers, et cetera, et cetera. I have actually worked with Alex and with Holly Willis, which is back over there. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on to our formal response from Henry Jenkins, I want to exercise moderatorial privilege here and just interject a couple of comments, because I'm very pleased by the content of the panel that we've just heard and the many ways that it extends the conversation that was begun in the previous panel. And I would just point out that we actually did have numerous conversations throughout the organizing of this panel and the conception of this event that you know, we wanted to make sure that our enthusiasm for DIY media was not misconstrued as kind of mindless utopianism. And so we have done our best to include opposing viewpoints and you know, sort of the other hints of perils and paradoxes of the many ways that these tools and platforms can be used. Let me just do a quick introduction for Henry, who needs not much introduction here, I believe. However, he is the co-director of the MIT Comparative Media Studies program and the author or editor of numerous books on various aspects of media and popular culture, including most recently Convergence Culture, Where Old and New Media Collide, and Fans, Bloggers, and Gamers, Exploring Participatory Culture. Jenkins writes regularly about media and cultural change at his blog henryjenkins.org, and he's one of the principal investigators for the Education Arcade, a consortium of educators and business leaders working to promote the educational use of computers and video games. So,
well, thanks for that introduction, Steve, and for that qualification about not wanting to be mindless utopian. I sort of find myself rising here as the token utopianist on a panel that sort of highlighted, I think, some of the challenges we face in building a participatory culture. But I don't like to think of myself as a mindless utopian, although I may be fatigued on occasion and say stupid things, but I like to think of myself as a critical utopian, by which, and I was raised in the city of Atlanta, where Martin Luther King's legacy looms large. And when I think about what a critical utopian contributes to a conversation, I think about what King did in the I Have a Dream speech. And he didn't do what the technological utopianist of the last decade said, I have a dream, and inevitably it's going to happen, and the technology is going to enable it, and we're going to just change the world. You know, sit back and do nothing, right? He laid out a vision of what a more perfect society would look like. And then he said, here's the society we live in, and how do we get from one to the other? And that's what I mean by a critical utopian stance. Not that we ignore the problems, but that we also don't ignore the possibilities. That we recognize the potential of change embedded in our cultural practices and our technological practices. In this case, the potential of change embedded in a world where everyday citizens can take media in their own hands and produce stuff, good, bad, and indifferent. We want to recognize that potential, and we also want to recognize what's blocking us from achieving the full benefits of a society that is more participatory. And for me, one of the criteria by which we think about participatory culture is diversity. And so some of the challenges posed here, some of the things that panelists have raised are very important roadblocks that we need to think about if we're going to achieve a diverse society, a participatory society, one that allows a lot of important ideas to be heard that are blocked by the current configurations of mass media. And so when I listen to this as someone who is a utopianist, I hear, and I'm happy to take on that label and happy to play that part in the dialogue with the panel here, I hear nevertheless things that I have to engage with, that I have to take seriously as I think about the world that we're living in. And that as we gather together to think about do-it-yourself media, we really need to explore both what this media can do and what's blocking us from achieving even more in doing it. We have to have a dream, and we have to have a realization of the reality we live in. And that's, to me, a fundamental challenge of how you develop a politics around a space like YouTube. So when I think about YouTube, these days I'm thinking more and more about the you in YouTube. You know, or the you on the cover of Time magazine. You know, what do we mean by that you? And I'm not a linguist, so bear with me. But you in the English language is an interesting pronoun because it's both singular and plural. Right? You refers to an individual and it refers to a group. And so one of the challenges as we look at YouTube and we look at the discourse around YouTube is how do we conceptualize this platform? Is this a space of individual expression and narcissism, as some critics have advocated? Or is it a platform that groups can mobilize around and use for a variety of purposes? And I'm optimistic that we can move it from one to the other. That often what's trivial about YouTube is the sense that whatever I make is important because it's important to me and I can throw it out there in the world, and I have no ethical responsibility, no social accountability to other people when I create this stuff. A kind of naive self-indulgence that produces some of the trivial videos that we heard criticism of at the beginning of this presentation. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that suggests, and a lot of the coverage of YouTube, most news coverage of YouTube has emphasized that notion of hedonistic youth producing video for no purpose other than to entertain themselves because they're bored on a rainy afternoon. But YouTube also to me, and this conference really embodies it, is the intersection of many different participatory cultures, each of which individually have a much longer history. So it's the intersection of what we saw during lunch, the history of citizen media and the efforts to create activist response to the electoral process. And it's a meeting place of the fan culture that I've written about for the last 16 years, where when 16 years ago, I was talking to Mary Van Dusen, who was using 2 VCRs and patch cords to edit music videos. And now we'll see tomorrow morning spectacular work that's come out of that. It's the intersection of skateboard culture, which in Korea, skateboard filmmakers became the cornerstone of the new Korean cinema in many ways, creating a more dynamic relationship aesthetically to space. And a lot of what's exciting people now about that movement is stuff that they learned on their skateboards a while ago. So I think it's about thinking about all those communities that come together. And when I said after Convergence Culture came out, the one book I wished I could have read before I wrote it was Yochai Binkler's Wealth of Networks, because Binkler complicates the simple binaries that cultural studies has been involved with for so long between commercial and amateur, or between co-optation and resistance, by inviting us to think about all of the different stakeholders with different motives, governmental, educational, nonprofit, activist groups, which are using all of the new media technologies in dialogue and in critique of the commercial uses and the amateur uses that we're involved with. And what this conference is doing really well is bringing together all those different communities to talk to each other about their shared use of this platform. And I think that's what's going to spark change, if change happens, is the cross-pollination of those groups with different motives, learning from each other, engaging with each other. And it's going to create a world where there's nothing pure, and there's going to be stuff that's semi-professional, that's barely political, that's that's both trying to be in the mainstream and trying to remain in the fringe, and trying to be co-opted and trying to be resistant at the same time. And it's the mixing of that that's really exciting. So as I think about this in political terms, I find myself thinking about a certain snowman who became a poster child recently about user-generated content. And I'm talking about the snowman video that played during CNN YouTube's debate in the fall among the Democratic candidates. And Mitt Romney's famous announcement that he refused to debate a snowman on national television, right? And that became the center point of this debate about whether the Republicans would have a YouTube debate or not. And I've been doing some research on the snowman and the CNN YouTube debate more generally. And this history is rather interesting, because the original snowman video was a video about a guy named Billion, the snowman, who watches his kid's head get lopped off by a samurai sword. It was a totally sophomoric YouTube video of the sort that we've seen over and over again. But it was also, interestingly enough, a tribute to Mr. Bill. Right? And Mr. Bill, if we follow that line back, when Saturday Night Live first launched, they had an invitation for people to send in home movies to Saturday Night Live, an original model of user-generated content. And people sent in their home movies, and Mr. Bill was chosen from those home movies, put on television, and then got a contract, the producer got a contract to produce about 25 Mr. Bill segments for Saturday Night Live. Right before Katrina, Mr. Bill's producer began using that same character for environmental activism. So that Mr. Bill was talking about the wetlands in Louisiana, where Mr. Bill's producer lived, and beginning to call attention to the environmental issues affecting Louisiana. So the two brothers in Minnesota who produced the Snowman video are watching this movement of Mr. Bill from being sort of slapstick to Mr. Bill being the embodiment of an environmental activism at a time when critics of the environmental movement have sort of been challenging them to come up with new rhetorical practices, new strategies, that they're taking themselves too seriously, they're playing the politics of fear. Some interesting writing about it by Stephen Duncombe in a book called Dream, who talks about new forms of activism that mobilize popular culture and fantasy. And so we can see this history. So that they make this video, it goes out on the CNN YouTube debate. And that's a weird, CNN YouTube debate's a really strange hybrid, because the content is generated by YouTube, and some 6,000 people put up videos wanting to be included in the debate. Some serious, some not. Some substantive, some not, some reflecting the existing agenda of the campaign, some all over the map, raising questions that the traditional journalists didn't talk about. And out of that pool, it got selected as one of 35 to play on national television, ends up being the one that everyone talked about after the debate. While this thing is happening, Mitt Romney is refusing to debate the snowman. Something interesting happens. They begin making videos critiquing Romney's campaign. So they've moved from being slapstick to participating in a large-scale debate to taking on a political role themselves as producers of videos that are going to challenge Romney's position. And they found themselves engaged with this moment in a New Hampshire appearance of Romney, where he held up a sign that a supporter had given them that said, Say no to Obama, Osama, and Chelsea's mama was the sign that he was raising. And he's smiling and waving to the camera, holding the sign. This picture began circulating via the blogosphere. And at a campaign stop in Iowa, a guy with a camera phone challenges him about the sign, and he sort of tells them, lighten up slightly, was his response. So what they did, knowing that the media was focusing on the YouTube snowman controversy, they produced a video which uses that language. CNN comes to their house in Minnesota and asks them about their video, and they're able to call attention to this controversy that so far the mainstream media hasn't been covering, but is running through the blogosphere, running through YouTube, and it merges back into mass media. So it's the set of connections, it's the movement from playing with media to engaging in activism through media. It's the flow of ideas from the mainstream media through amateur media and back again, which is where the sweet spot is in thinking about political change. It's not a world where YouTube exists in a vacuum and the mass media exists someplace else. It's a world where the two are actively engaged with each other. It's not a world where the conversations only go on YouTube. YouTube doesn't make sense in a world which didn't have blogs, social network sites, a live journal, all of these other places where we go to discuss it. And it's the conversations that are generated by YouTube content because it's spreadable, not sticky. You know, this is an important distinction. For a long time, we talked about sites as sticky, like they were roach motels that we all get stuck to, and we stay there, and our attention isn't supposed to wander. What's interesting about YouTube is it's about distribution. It's about the flow of content across as many different media channels, across all these different sites, where people localize and respond to the content, not through the forum, which I agree are uniformly trivial, but through the blog discussions that take place around much of that content, where they're relocalized for specific publics and mobilized, hopefully in ways that enhance activism. And that, to me, is where the real power is. So I said I'm a critical utopian. Where are the obstacles, then? I think there's some exciting stuff emerging. We're in a transitional moment. We're struggling to figure out how to use this stuff effectively for activism. There are a bunch of obstacles here. One is what I talk about often when I'm talking in my media literacy hat, the participation gap, right? We fought for 20 years about the digital divide, and the digital divide was about access to technology. The participation gap is about access to social skills and cultural competencies that enable us to feel empowered to participate. So suppose we have an open platform where anyone can produce media and circulate it. Why then do some segments of the population produce and circulate media and others not? And it has to do with the invisible messages they receive in their day-to-day lives, which tell them that they're not able to participate, that reinforce that sense of disempowerment. It's the lack of access to the skills needed to participate. It's the educational opportunities that's provided to those people. And that's one reason why new media literacies are absolutely central to any discussion of do-it-yourself media, that we've got to begin to engage with those segments of the population who feel unable to participate in this environment. Second obstacle is the kind of majoritarian principles that underlie the user moderation system on many of these sites. That is to say, that if we look at the top videos, and many critics have commented on this, the top videos on YouTube are almost invariably produced by white middle-class men, because we have a system that says if everyone votes, the best content rises to the top. Well, in political life, we've been taught since John Stuart Mill's to be skeptical of pure majoritarian impulses that override the voices of minorities. And so we really have to look at what are the ways that a participatory culture guarantees diversity? What are the ways that minority perspectives get recognized and pulled upward by that system? And if the engineering of votes in something like YouTube tends to mask minority perspectives, then we should be deeply skeptical of it. Then if you get through all of that, then you face that barrage of hater talk, you know, the hate speech that surrounds diversity on YouTube and the ways in which how the people who post stuff gets harassed, whatever support they get in their own communities as this stuff travels in the social networks they come from. On YouTube, they're going to be berated and made fun of and ridiculed and made to feel small and little, and every racist and sexist message is going to be dumped on them if they choose to use that particular platform. On the other hand, my fear is if we create these safe little enclaves for activist video, what's going to motivate anyone who's not already committed to the message to move into those spaces? So if it's not part of the mainstream and it isn't part of what travels through the culture, it's going to be excluded from the conversation. And so while there's a problem, I think, in minority perspectives, including human rights perspectives and so forth, not bubbling to the top in YouTube, I think there's equally a problem of them citing, well, we're just going to speak to the choir and then we're going to move into a space that's sort of locked down and doesn't, only people have to go and actively seek it out. So I think there is a paradox about thinking about how we mobilize in this environment that we really need to think about. So I began by talking about the you and the problems of the you, and I was reminded this past week or so about something Justine Cassell, a former colleague of mine at MIT, now at Northwestern, talks about when she's looked at the discourse online of young people and the notions of leadership online of young people as compared to the political discourse. And she is a linguist. And what she says, if you look at adult politicians, the most often used word is I. And if you look at young people, young leaders in digital spaces, the most often word is we. And they're sort of saying, what are we going to do? What decision, what's our values? What are our goals? There's a sense of incorporation, of collective intelligence, of collaboration that's really powerfully and viscerally part of the politics of the younger generation, as Justine Cassell has talked about it. And I thought about that this past week when I was waiting in line with 8,000 people out in Boston to see Barack Obama speak. And if you saw the videos before where they talked about the 3,000 to 4,000 people who showed up for the Chicago protest in 1968 and the myth about 68 changing our political culture, and you think about the 8,000 people in Boston and the thousands of people all around the country who came, something really interesting is happening, especially when mainstream media didn't tell anyone where that rally was. That was only available through digital channels and only people connecting. And the overwhelming majority of those people that I saw in that line were people under the age of 30. And the statistics are showing in state after state that people under 30, more people under 30 are voting in this primary season than people over 60. The first time since 18-year-olds have gotten the right to vote, these young people are being mobilized by something about we that actually gets them into political action. And it's not just Obama that's doing it. Lots of the other candidates are also motivating young people to participate. And I was waiting in line, just overhearing the conversations, and people were talking about how they got interested in Obama. And they were talking about Obama Girl, and they were talking about the 1984 video, and they were talking about mashups, and they were talking about Black Eyed Peas' new music video. They were talking about stuff that wasn't in the mainstream. And of course they were talking about The Daily Show and Colbert. They were talking about stuff that's both commercial and non-commercial, but particularly stuff that's emerged through this language of parody that's enabled by YouTube that changes the discourse of American politics. It does tell us to lighten up slightly, but also says comedy and entertainment can be used very effectively for purposes of education and politics. And so I think about, you know, I heard the phrase about do it ourselves or do it with others video. What happens when we reinvent YouTube as WeTube and begin to think about the change that's enabled by mobilizing these new technologies and the practices that are around them to bring about substantive political change, including the diversification of culture, including fights for the rights of people to participate in the key decision-making, including the rights to intellectual property and fair use rights and free speech rights that emerge in the struggles over the legal dimensions that we'll talk about later in this conference. And so the challenge is to imagine WeTube and not YouTube. Thank you.
Okay, so we started this panel 15 minutes late, which means we have exactly 12 minutes for questions, which is eating 15 minutes of our 30-minute break after this. Questions?
My name is Marie Drennan, and I teach interactive media writing at San Francisco State. And I agree with much that's been said about the failures of YouTube. I try to use it in our department, and it has a lot of problems. But it's also, interestingly, it's, you know, for good or bad, emerged as the central place where all video goes. So I was just wondering, does anybody see any, if you can remember the world before Google, which is really hard to do, before we had this kind of central resource, not that I would argue that YouTube should be the only one, but does anybody see a need to, or actually sort of protect or foster there being some place where all video goes, so that we don't fall back into the age of complete chaos and fragmentation when no one could find anything, and your only hope of finding something was hearing about it kind of through word of mouth or the circles you were already in, as opposed to the ones that you might never come across through your own contacts?
Well, I'll just say something quickly that I sort of pointed at, which is one of the failings of the huge archive, more videos than have ever been available ever, you know, in any of our lives, and more things than we can get our hands at, and it's so exciting to see something that you never got to see 3 years before because it's there, is it's insane how poorly the archive functions. And it's a question we asked a lot, like what was at stake for them to not, you know, allow you to navigate it better. And of course, the big problem is, we talked to someone from YouTube, you know, users create the tags, and that's the only system they use. So everything's user generated. So until there's some good archivists working there, which they have no reason to do, it is a completely unruly archive. It, you know, it may be better than before, but I think it's a fundamental question if you're thinking about learning, that you have, you know, the best library ever in the history of moving images that's unusable. You know, or moderately usable. So you might find one, but there are probably thousands of the things you want that you don't know the word to put in to find, or it's not going to find it for you. So it's like, I'm going to hire the YouTube archivists, you know, and then I think what you're saying would really make sense.
I'm sorry, and the piece I didn't put in there was the ease of upload to YouTube. The fact that anyone, basically almost anywhere in the world, can pretty easily upload to YouTube compared to upload even to Liberal Internet Archive. It just isn't as easy. That was kind of what I left out of that.
I just wanted to say what's sort of obvious, but to me is the kind of elephant in the room about the for-profit status of YouTube and other sites like that. And the way in which it seems that site is being treated as a public space when, of course, it is not a public space, even though it is serving the function of a public space. I come to this conference representing fans and representing vidders who have made the move the other way from we've been hiding, really, in all sorts of ways, and are kind of trying to move our stuff more publicly. But we've found that the limitations of for-profit sites, right, are really kind of causing us a problem, and that our stuff is getting kind of thrown off it. That there's something also about putting all of this stuff without context, right, altogether, that does open up, as Henry was saying, for mockery and other kinds of things. So that, in fact, we're trying to start nonprofit spaces to host art and to host other kinds of functioning. And I feel like when fandom started anyway, the internet was mainly university servers, government servers. I mean, there were places that were genuinely public. And it feels like that's gone completely off the table. We ourselves are creating nonprofit organizations to host this stuff. But I sort of wonder why there is no discussion of a genuine nonprofit space that has emerged so far, even in all of these kind of conversations.
That was actually the next slide that I didn't get to because I ran out of time, is the question around the fact that we're talking about civic engagement in a space that's not really civic. And you can spend a lot of time organizing YouTube, but fundamentally we have no effect in able to deal with its governance structures. And I think that there's a question around surveillance within that context as well. One of the things that for a lot of our members, not just looking at YouTube, but MySpace and Friendster and Facebook, is that all of the information that you go into when you do your EULA agreement is tracked and used. It can be used against you with the state. So, for example, when we were working with that community in the Midwest that were totally attacked by ICE, afterwards, in order to kind of grieve for people that were lost, people posted what had happened to their families on MySpace. ICE then went into their MySpace pages, used that information against them in their deportation cases. So to even be able to look at civic engagement on the internet, we also have to have a real engagement around surveillance and privacy and security in a meaningful way, and knowing that really nothing, and really be able to give people tools to be able to engage with that. And I think even within a nonprofit structure, nonprofits in the United States are still soft arms of the state. So if you're trying to figure out ways that you're actually able to keep independent civic engagement, we have to really radically rethink what civic engagement looks like, separate from governmental structures, especially when the internet is a transnational structure.
Nice. Just add a quick comment to that.
I just wanted to add, none of those social networking sites either have any incentive really to any commitment, whether it's fair use, privacy, community, other than the profit motive, right? So it seems to me that until it's something plus a 4-click, right? That is, at least my understanding, is pretty much their only bottom line business strategy. So none of these things are getting addressed.
Alexandra responding. Can you bring the microphone over here, please?
You know, and maybe it was a little unclear in my talk. I'm not sure it's an either or. And in fact, for many human rights purposes, I would advocate placing it on YouTube. I think it's a question of different spaces for different uses. One of the things I was emphasizing in a human rights context is, in a global context, there's very different situations. I don't think we're yet talking in a universal sort of situation in terms of participatory culture. And so, for example, a site that focuses on user security, doesn't hold IPs, is very focused on, say, safety and security and consent, might be the appropriate space for that, like a space for artists might be appropriate. At other times, you might very much want to be on YouTube, Blip TV, clearly everywhere else. So.
Great. Over here?
Yeah. Mimi Ito asked earlier, what do we need to know? And I think one of the things that we need to know relates to what Henry mentioned, which is the participation gap. Why is there a gap? And if we take into consideration what John Seeley Brown said earlier, as I'm trying to connect everything here, because it is nice that there are multiple communities talking to each other, there is this process of digital epistemology, and people really go about their participation in different ways that relates to knowledge and skills of Web 2.0 technology or social media technology, or background and culture, or the type of the message that they're crafting and how complex it is to do it. So I think you were talking, Henry, about this participation gap, and it's this new digital divide. It's not about access, it's about when we have access, do we really know how to participate and how important it is? And then there are these examples of environments that allow people to maybe learn how to participate and express themselves in a safe, comfortable, and we do the same in Global ORIA, in my Global Life and my Science Life network that we do. But the hope is, I think, that maybe after they are in your networks, that they go to YouTube, that they go to Facebook, that they go to the other social networks and get their beautifully crafted quality media in these other networks so they can really get the attention. And I think that I wonder what you think about that it's not just this or that. It's not just you or we, or it's not just the big networks or the niche ones, but it's some sort of feeling comfortable so you can really develop your knowledge and go through your route of digital epistemology and eventually get to speak to the public.
Since that's directed to me, I'm trying to be as respondent, let the panelists speak, but I'll address, since that was, if I wasn't clear, I think absolutely that what we want are multiple sites and multiple platforms and active flow between them. That again, just as YouTube is a hybrid structure that enables many groups to work, the web is a bigger hybrid structure, which YouTube is simply one platform among many. And that one of the ways we overcome the participation gap is through educational interventions of all kinds. That I'm involved with through the MacArthur Foundation with Project New Media Literacies. That's an intervention. Certainly the Organization for Transformative Work's a different kind of organization. The panelists you've seen up here are a different kind of interventions. And I think we need all of that in order to enable the overcoming of the participation gap. Because different segments of the population face different obstacles in terms of moving into full participation in that online world. And YouTube shouldn't be the end point in that. As I said, YouTube really only matters to me because the content moves out of YouTube and into other communities and other circulation. But what makes YouTube powerful is that it's that meeting point between all of those groups, that they learn from each other and they encounter messages there that they wouldn't encounter otherwise. And that's why I think it's worth fighting for inclusion in YouTube rather than fighting to sort of create a totally separate space that serves the same functions for some subsegment of the population. It's precisely the point that's made about there needs to be some space that everything travels through. Now, whether there needs to be profit or non-profit, I'm agnostic. I think there are arguments for both as being valuable models for thinking about how we create a toehold in the space, and it's an issue that should be explored.
Good. Next question, start in the back, and then we'll come back.
Hi, Mark Davis, Yahoo. So it's a question for the panel and for Henry. Am I getting some weird feedback here? Okay. So it's a bit of a reflection and a challenge to the panel. The discussions we're having sound very familiar. In fact, a lot of them have had as long ago as 18 to 15 years ago. And about the democratization of media, I wrote Garage Cinema and the Future of Media Technology in 1997. Henry's been talking about it for a long time. What I would encourage the panel to think about and talk about is that we're fetishizing an old artifact, the camcorder, because of its association with mainstream cultural production and news media and Hollywood, when we're actually missing what's going to be the most important DIY medium for the globe and is already today. How many of you have cell phones on you right now? Okay, and most of you that have them probably have cameras in them. So there's 2.7 billion of these in the world today. There's going to be 4 billion in 2010. In 2010, these will have HD quality video recording connected by 3G networks. Now I know that that's an elitist first world group of people that will have those initially, but within 5 years, most people in the world that have a communications device with them will have very high quality video recording and the ability to share it. So my question to you guys is that you're thinking of, and also to do it in real time, and there's a video camera in there, and to do it in real time. So we're fetishizing YouTube and the camcorder, which really are reflections of older styles of media production, which involve editing and archiving and retrieval and broadcasting on-demand polling and video on demand, rather than very large distributed groups of people in the billions around the world in real time sharing media with each other, which is 3 to 5 years away. And that has a cultural reality. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect about not the world of 15 years ago that we happen to have finally arrived at, but the world of 5 years from now that we're almost approaching.
But what's interesting to me about your question is a dividing line that I feel like we've already kind of passed that threshold in these conversations. It's not about access to technology. I mean, whatever the technology is, like we always thought the revolution was going to occur when the technology, we access the technology. Okay, that's done. So I think that so that'll be on it'll be on phones. What else do we need, given that distribution and production are now highly accessible? And I think that's the conversation. So we hear context. We hear the ability, media literacy. For me, analysis theory, politics, history, the ability to communicate together once we have those images. I mean, so that we have access to producing and disseminating images. So I think, yes, the celebration. We don't need to celebrate the technology, or we can celebrate the technology as long as we then start the conversation about what else we need to facilitate radical uses of the technology.
You and that, and I think Henry touched on the notion of we too. So we almost fetishize the notion of the single author production or the small group production, and we miss out on what will really be very large-scale contributions by literally billions of people, and that being the platform for participation, not the one we've inherited from earlier styles of production and consumption. So that's sort of my challenge to you, is to really think about incredibly large scales of people connecting to each other.
We're at time. Do we have time for, will you guys hang out for one more question? Yeah? Actually, I'll sit down.
Well, I think it was very important what Henry has reminded us, that YouTube doesn't exist in isolation. And it's interesting that at the end of this conference, at the end of the first day of the conference, or towards the end, and nobody has mentioned the term Web 3.0 today at all. Maybe people think it's a commercial term, well, partly it is. And I think one of the principles of media today, it may be different in 5 years, is that media moves around, right? So something is posted on a particular site, a blog, from where it travels to our sites, our blogs, our hard drives, our people. And this new type of media mobility, I think, is a fundamental new dimension of media culture, which didn't really exist, even, I would say, 10 years ago. And I think that perhaps, when you kind of do media education, right, or you educate sort of, absolutely inspiring, fantastic projects, maybe this is what, right, people have to be taught, is that if you produce something really successful, it's going to go all over. And most people are probably going to get this, on their device or their RSS feed, and they don't even know where it was posted first, right? So how do you create kind of political media conversations, right, in this new situation where the original context no longer matters, right, where everything can travel around, and how do you actually do it successfully, right? For example, for this conference, people did very, I think, media literate thing. We said, if you put something somewhere, you tag it with a particular tag, and then you can automatically find things which are tag like that. So that's one of the principles of media education, I think.
Can I say something? Well, just to respond, I don't know the name of the gentleman in the back.
Mark Davis.
Well, when we were invited to give this talk, and it's not anything defensive, but it was very much concentrated around video. And I think that that's why all of us here sort of channeled our conversation around that. If the panel was about something else, we would have talked about something else. But and we would have talked about Web 2.0 and different strategies that we have to, explore our local communities using Web 2.0 technologies, telling, multiple perspective stories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I agree about the fetishism of the video camera, but even the cell phone is going to be a technological fetish. The most important thing that we have, and I think that a lot of the people here were talking about and maybe just didn't come to the surface enough, the most ancient stories, the most ancient thing that we have are stories and people. And we may have all these technologies, and we'll just figure out different ways to get those things across, share them, participate in them. But that's basically what we agreed on.
I got to cut it off because we're way over time, and I want to draw attention to so we have about a 10-minute break. Can I have a round of applause for our panelists first?